Thank you to Safaricom, one of our key sponsors for this evening. I'd like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Carol Ajema. Ajema, I beg your pardon, Senior Gender and GBV Specialist at the International Center for Research on Women. Round of applause for her.
That's an honor, just being, given this privilege, and I was wondering how comes that privilege. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, just acknowledging the protocols that have been mentioned here before. I'm Carol Ajema with the International Center for Research on Women. And as I stand here, for me, it's about just reflecting on women having power, a voice, and a choice in the market. And this kind of conversation really brings us to a point of knowing that it's not a group you can ignore. And just reflecting on the social media engagement, when you find, quote unquote, a particular woman is dissatisfied with a product, you always see the companies quickly reacting. And I think it just resonates with what Eva has said, given the last year's findings and how then that also helps to shape the discussions. So it's my great pleasure today to represent the International Center for Research on Women. This particular event, as has been mentioned, is the second of the 3 events we are hosting as a country in collaboration with the State Department of Gender. So we are quite honored, Madam Cass, because this also is not just a second event, but it's also one of those where the government has really demonstrated partnership with the private sector. And for me, that's really commendable because we are coming from a space whereby it's all about collaboration and partnership, and also bringing to the fore the investments of data. So it's not just about Ipsos having done this study, but looking at the place of data in trying to advance gender equality agenda. Minus the data, then we will not be able to make meaningful investment. So this really is a commendable initiative, and we are glad that the BSD group was able to put this together. So thank you so much, and Ipsos for also championing this particular call, because I believe it's on the basis of the credibility of the data that they produced last year that we are having this conversation today. So we are really glad to be part of this conversation. And as I would say, is women and girls really constitute the largest proportion of the population. And as such, a great influencer within the ecosystem of decision making. At the household level, we know even if they wouldn't have that voice, in terms of the decisions that are made, really we can't ignore. And the decisions are around the kind of product to be purchased, the brand, the quantity, and even just looking at whether the brand speaks to they as women and the households that they serve. So those are the key things that we are looking at this morning and evening for some of us. So we can also not continue to overemphasize the existing gender inequalities and how these continue to disenfranchise the women. And this is observed from a point of the inequalities in accessing information, in accessing services, in accessing the skills that are required to generate some of these brands we are talking about, resources, decision-making, and even influencing the market trends. So if we are able to shift this discourse for women, then we'll be able to see more of these women being able to influence the brands that we will be made mention of today. And it is said, and I remember in one of the clips that Joe had projected earlier on, that men are mission and task-oriented shoppers, while women are more likely to be discovery-oriented with focus on the outcome. So if your outcome is to save or to stretch that shilling further, then that is what will guide your decision. If your outcome is on a product that will last longer in the house, then that is what you will go with. So there is a goal that guides the decisions of these women. So businesses and investors really, who are not intentionally investing with a gender lens in mind, are missing out on the significant impact and business opportunities that are out there in the form of women and girls. So some of the factors that really influence women's preferences on certain brands and services include loyalty. That has been mentioned. And I think if I ask in this group, there are some of us who are using products, not because we made the decision, but because someone else in our line made that decision, and every time you go to the shop, they'll tell you, go and buy this one. And we've continued with the same trend, loyalty. So if it's that particular thing that guides the women to determine the brand, how do we maximize on that particular element? Secondly, some of us purchase because of curiosity. And if that's your business model, then it calls upon you to be innovative. Because if I'm curious about your product and 3-4 months later I find it's the same thing, I will shift to the next one. So for those who are seated here and you're leveraging on the innovation, especially with the generation we're having now, it just calls for us to continue satisfying this market that is there. Integrity matters, quality, affordability, and access. Because when we say integrity to the audience, then we are looking at what is it that these women want? And how do we ensure that as a business we remain true to these women without relaxing on the quality? We know that the prices are inflating, but how do you ensure that your product still has the same standards? So even as you're talking about the brands women want, we're not saying that the quality should be subsidized. We're saying the quality should, if not anything, go higher. Problem solving. We purchase things based on the extent to which that product is solving my problem. If my problem is access, then the product needs to be brought closer. If my problem is affordability, then the business providers out there need to look at how do they resonate to my need? How do they meet my problem? How do they ensure that I as Carol feel comfortable with the products that they are providing? Agility, that's the other factor. To what extent are these brands responsive to our needs? And the moment we realize that there is that responsiveness, and responsiveness here means we capture the voice of women in designing that product, we capture the voices of women in being able to evaluate whether the product meets our needs, we capture the voices of the women in determining whether it fits the top 100 or not. So we involve them in the entire chain. Lastly, vulnerability. Remember, we are coming from a space where there are so many things that are making these women vulnerable. And the vulnerability is not just demonstrating their financial power. We are also looking at the mental status of these women. Remember, some of us purchase based on our state of mind as well, and the other issues that surround our livelihoods and life as women. And one of the things that we have noted during this COVID period is that if I speak to the women who are in business, and you've talked about the women who are doing these SMEs and in Juakali, majority of these women rely on various financial products. And because of their vulnerability, we've seen some of these ladies go into fintechs and the loan sharks. Why? Not because those products are cheap, but because they're easily accessible. So for those who are seated here and maybe one of your products is financial services to the business players out there, how do we ensure that these women do not become more vulnerable to the loan sharks? How do we tailor our products in a way that these women are able to access safe and reliable financial mechanisms out there? And that's just one element in terms of vulnerability. So the results of the study that is to be disseminated today basically are useful to help inform the customer preferences and the consumer behaviors, and hopefully push companies to embrace emerging trends while leaving no one behind. It is therefore imperative for companies to invest in gender-smart solutions or innovations that are inclusive, sustainable, and respect the dignity of all. COVID-19 has brought to fore the place of e-commerce in business, but this calls for authenticity and sensitivity to clients' choices. We know within this space we've had people who order things online. You order for blue, but you get a yellow. Does it resonate with some of us? So e-platforms doesn't mean we relax on the integrity and quality issues. So women thrive through their social networks, translating into social capital. So as we diversify into technology, let's endeavor to capture the voices of these women who are consumers and also producers of some of these particular products. Digital solutions should therefore translate to optimal reach and safe platforms for women, because that doesn't advance for us to also have women exploited because we are moving into technology. So finally, we commend the BSD Group and Ipsos for being a trailblazer in this space and amplifying the voices of women as leaders, as influencers, as consumers, as designers, as innovators, into the business arena. So as we listen in today, we are really calling forward to the private sector to continue advancing equal opportunities for women. And these opportunities, we are looking at opportunities that are reflective of diversity, equity, and inclusivity. To the government, while we commend the meaningful work that you've continued to do, We're also looking at how do we translate some of the affirmative funds that we have there to be able to propel women into a better space in terms of decision making. And to all of us who are seated here and those who've joined online, it's upon us to make this space safe for women, for them to voice out their preferences and choices. Women have a choice, we have a voice, and we have power to determine who becomes the top one or who becomes X number. Thank you so much.